Good day, my name is Ulrich Feiter. I'm the CEO of Parsaval, a herbal pharmaceutical company in South Africa. 10 years of Nagoya Protocol. It's time to take stock, look back what has happened so far and what the future may hold for the implementation of it. As a company, we have been involved in quite a number of supply chains, both in South Africa as well as in other African countries, and we have experienced that the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol is very much dependent on the local interpretation and then obviously in implementation. We have seen in many instances that compliance is difficult, is tedious, it's a long, drawn-out process, and that where one wishes that there would be some complete compliance highways built for industry. We also see that there is a focus on monetary benefits for people, and that the other great stakeholder, nature and biodiversity, often take a backseat.
Hello, my name is Timothy Hodges. I'm a professor of practice at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. I think we're finally seeing a growing realization that the protocol is and has always been about sustainable development. We are all in this together, and collaboration is crucial across jurisdictions, but also between ministries of health and the environment. Sharing virus samples and relevant sequence information is crucial to the development of diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. So too is the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits resulting from the sharing of samples and DSI on the virus that causes COVID-19. All countries have a role to play in ensuring the flow of both samples and DSI, as well as sharing the benefits that are generated. I strongly believe that the protocol is even more relevant today than in 2010. It is a cornerstone of sustainable development and generates benefits for researchers, indigenous peoples, industry, governments, and public and private researchers. The protocol embraces a win-win approach.
Welcome, colleagues, to this third session of the Global Conference on Access to Genetic Resources and Benefit Sharing. In this case, a dialogue between governments and private sector. Today, we are going to hear from 3 country experiences in the implementation of the Nagoya Protocol, and also the experience of private sectors that are implementing projects in those countries. And also we will hear from other colleagues from private companies and different biotech sectors that will introduce their experience in the implementation of ABS projects, and also the challenges that they are facing. Let me just provide you very quickly the basic logistic notes for this event. This session is being recorded and will be available through the Global ABS community, the community of practice of the UNDP-GEF Global ABS project. During this session, participants' microphones will be muted, but we will be able to ask questions through the Q&A functionality available at the toolbar located at the bottom of your screen. We encourage you to send your questions during the session through the Q&A part, and not to use the chat box for Q&A as for questions, because you run the risk of getting lost in the middle of other messages, okay? Participants' questions will be addressed after the panelists' presentation at the end of the session during the Q&A session as scheduled. And of course, to continue discussions on the topic of this webinar, please visit the Global ABS community and leave your discussion on the forum section. Before we start, I would like to highlight and ensure that you are all comfortable as this session is being interpreted. We had interpretation into French and into Spanish. So please look for the interpretation button at the toolbar and choose the channel that you want to follow during the event, the meeting. So from my side, just to highlight, to welcome you to this session. Last Wednesday, November 4th, we had 3 regional sessions of dialogue between ABS national competent authorities and researchers, which were an interesting marathon, in particular for those panelists that cover all of them. And this week, we hold this third session, which is a second dialogue, in this case between ABS national competent authorities and the private sector, to understand the evolution of and the trends in the implementation of ABS in the different regions, and to continue working in the identification of the elements of the ABS that we all need, and take advantage of the unique opportunity that the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework negotiations brings to all of us. Let me introduce our moderator for this third session with the private sector, Ms. Isabel Lopez Noriega, who is policy specialist at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and the International Center for Tropical Agriculture. Her area of expertise is biodiversity law, specialized in national, regional, and international policies and laws dealing with United resources. She has coordinated and been involved in research and development projects, looking at the impacts of policies and legal frameworks on different actors' capacity to access, use, conserve, and exchange genetic resources. Since 2016, she coordinates the policy module under the CGIIR platform of international gene banks. Isabel was coordinating a seminar yesterday on new plant varieties with a key question of register or not register, not to register. And we are glad that you have registered today for this event, and we welcome you to the conference. So Isabel, you not only have the floor, but you are in total power of the session.
Thank you, Alejandro, and your last words are really, really tempting. I will try to behave. First of all, thanks to the organizers, the UNDP-GEF Global ABS project and the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity for inviting me to moderate the session today. I'm honored to be here with all of you and to have the opportunity to interact with this impressive group of representatives of different countries and private industry. Thanks also to all the participants, everyone who's following this session online. As you have already said, we will have a dialogue between the ABS national competent authorities and the biotech companies. I think this is a very, very important initiative, simply based on the fact that the engagement of private industry in the implementation of access and benefit sharing rules is crucial, particularly for ensuring a predictable and constant flow of monetary and non-monetary benefits that can incentivize the provider communities and the provider countries' investments into conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. And this in turn is going to benefit the private industry whose work depend on biological resources, biological and genetic resources. I see private sector as a key actor in the implementation of ABS and the realization, the use of ABS towards bigger development objectives. In this session, we will not go very much in depth into the different issues. We don't aim to provide solutions for all the issues that we know come with the adoption of an ABS system. The idea is to initiate a dialogue and to promote a dialogue among authorities and private industry that we hope will continue at the national and regional level. This engagement of the private sector has to take place initially at the national level. So this is just a push for the different authorities and also for the private sector to continue that engagement within the countries and within the regions. You have already talked about the agenda and how we have organized the program for today. Before starting with the first presentation, I would like to remind our speakers and all participants about some practical points. For the speakers, please be brief. We want to make sure that we will have time for discussions, for questions and answers. This is a unique opportunity for many of the participants to ask questions to some of the panelists representing the private sector. So please allow time for those questions. Please speak slowly. Remember that we have interpretation. You speaking slowly will make our interpreters' lives much easier. For all the participants, as Alejandro has said, please write your questions in the questions and answers section at the bottom of the Zoom screen. I'm going to be presenting all the speakers. I won't read your whole bios. That's available for all the participants to see in the conference website. So please go there and check the details of the impressive experience of all the speakers we have today. I will simply introduce you by your name and the organization you work for and your titles within those organizations. And the first presenter today is Mr. Matthew Diaz, who works as Information Management Officer at the Convention of Biological Diversity, at the Secretariat of the Convention of Biological Diversity. He's in charge of the ABS clearinghouse mechanism, and he will entertain us with a presentation on the ABS system and the Convention of Biological Diversity and the Nagoya Protocol, highlighting the key elements related to the engagement of the private sector. Matthew's presentations are famous, as far as I understand. He always surprises the audience with different lighting things. Let's see what he has for us today. Matthew, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Alejandro. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. As Isabel mentioned, my name is Matthew Diaz. I'm working at the SCBD in the ABS unit. Let me just share my screen. I think I had to push share. How's that now?
Perfect.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So today my presentation is entitled Learning to Dance the Nagoya Protocol. So I don't know if you were there for our first session on October 29th, and that was the 10th year anniversary of the protocol. And we had quite a party theme, and I kind of wanted to continue this party theme. And I thought that dancing was a pretty universal way to celebrate. I think everybody can relate to dancing. So yeah, that's sort of the theme of this presentation. And the picture I chose is of a middle school dance. And for me, it was a specific picture I chose. It's a very awkward picture, but for me, it sums up the relationship between the private sector and government in terms of ABS. So I apologize because perhaps a middle school dance is a very North American concept. So I'll just explain a little bit. Middle school dances are pure awkwardness, really. It's the epitome of awkwardness. Middle school, where I'm from, starts at grade 7, but from grade 1 to 6, you learn to relate to your classmates in a certain way, in a certain environment. in a classroom or perhaps on the playground. You have this relationship with them, you kind of understand the rules, and you're just getting into that. Then all of a sudden in grade 7, and this is maybe something the private sector can also relate to, is private sector users, is that with all of a sudden, with little warning, you are shoved into a dimly lit school gym with your other classmates in this pseudo kind of romantic atmosphere while some teachers play popular music and they watch you. So it's a very awkward setting. But you have an idea of what you're supposed to do. You kind of know what you want to do. You know that, but you have to learn to relate and change your mindset and relate to your classmates on an entirely different level than what you're used to. So that's sort of the analogy that I was going for. So what I wanted to do is that so there's some new rules that get imposed on you in this middle school dance setting. Yeah, so the protocol is also kind of starting into its teenage years. It just celebrated its 10th birthday. So I wanted to prepare a few tips for government and the private sector to make this period a little less awkward. So some of the tips that I'll go over today are the music. The music in this type of situation is very important. So we'll talk a little about the music. Also, it's very important to be a good dance partner. Being a good dance partner, ABS is all about being a good partner and a good dance partner. So, and also we'll talk a little bit about sharing the benefits of success. So next slide. Okay. So first of all, the music is important, very important. And as Alejandro knows, this is his favorite section in the record store. And music is extremely important because it sets the mood. It gets the party rolling, and it can really make or break a party. So the Nagoya Protocol is kind of a beat that allows for a lot of individual expression from different countries. If you have different circumstances, you can all dance to it. It's the kind of music that it's the kind of music that everyone can dance to and get moving to. So that's yeah. Okay. So even though when you first start out dancing at a middle school dance, there's some new rules. You're not sure of what to do. You're always very scared about doing something wrong or making a mistake or wearing the wrong clothes or doing something. I don't know if you remember those kind of teenage years, but it's very awkward and angsty, and you're very unsure about yourself and others, especially in this new context where you have to relate to each other. So this is just to say that users and providers have different concerns when it comes to being a good dance partner or ABS. We're going to be hearing today from a number of countries and a number of users and private sector users. And I think it's important to imagine yourself in the other person's shoes. I think that's sort of the spirit of this dialogue is that when you put yourself in someone else's shoes, it's easier to understand them, it's easier to find compromises, it's easier to find solutions and understand their point of view. So I invite you to do that when you hear from the following speakers. And I think this kind of empathy is an important tool. It's an important tool in our work at the UN. It's important, probably a very important tool also for business and knowing your customers, it's an important tool to be a good partner in anything. So I invite you to do that. So just well, providers want insurance that benefits will be shared after access is granted. And a lot of times we will hear that the private sector users want legal certainty and they want clear, workable regulations. So maybe you've seen this album in your local record store, but this is the Nagoya Protocol is a system that is specifically built to get users and providers moving in a way where everyone benefits. So it's a framework that actually treats users and providers a little bit more like partners. So it has provisions in it that address the concerns of both people, both stakeholders, both partners, and it also provides a common goal that we can, even though we have different concerns, we have a common goal and we have some incentives to achieve it. So the basic principle, I think you probably all know, but providers exchange access with users for a fair share of the benefits that result from utilization. And without utilization, there are no benefits. So it provides this incentive to aim for this goal. So when it comes to finding a good dance partner, you really want to find someone who is committed. Trustworthy communication is important, providing clear expectations, and sharing in the successes. So I want you to also, while you're listening to this session, is to think about if you are actually a good ABS dance partner, because that's the important. So one of the most important things here is commitment. Commitment is extremely important. I think there's nothing worse than being at a middle school dance and you have a crush on someone from grade 1 to 6, and then you actually get the opportunity to dance with them, but you only realize that they really actually wanted to dance with your best friend. So this really, I want to emphasize that commitment, finding a good dance partner that has that's committed and you share the same common goals and values is very helpful. So ratifying the protocol means committing to it. It means you are striving to achieve this ambitious goal that it sets out, which is the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources. So that means parties who ratify the protocol must establish some ABS systems, the national ABS systems that facilitate and promote ABS. And basically we call those the conditions that promote ABS are called the ABCs of ABS, and their access. So access, we want to enhance legal certainty, clarity, transparency around accessing genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge. Benefit sharing, countries have to increase opportunities to share benefits from the use of genetic resources and or associated traditional knowledge. And compliance. So compliance is important to ensure compliance with the ABS measures and transparency in monitoring utilization of genetic resources as they move through the value chain. So basically, countries have to set up these ABS systems that provide some sort of carrots and sticks or incentives and penalties to sort of encourage ABS to happen. And I think probably what helps a lot in the design of these systems, or at any time in these systems, the work lifespan of these systems, is engagement and participation from all stakeholders. I was saying that users and providers are and the Nagoya Protocol kind of frames them as partners. And I think what really helps governments to build very realistic and implementable and workable policy is when we can have a dialogue and hear the concerns of all the stakeholders involved, including the private sector, which is a very important sector for ABS, and to allow them to get some ownership and commitment over trying to realize this common goal. So commitment is very important. The next thing that's particularly important is communication. So communication, effective communication can help foster trust and clarity and certainty, and also make new opportunities available. So it, in particular for the private sector, I think trust is one of the most important things that needs to be sort of fostered in ABS relationships, because ABS relationships, partnerships are a lot of times long-term partnerships. It takes a long time to develop certain projects, over 10 years sometimes. And then this development happens in another country where you don't have any jurisdiction over how or what's happening with your genetic resources. So this trust between users and providers, the trust between different countries is very, very important. Another reason communication is so important is because it helps to clarify expectations. And I think this is another thing that is very important when we deal with government and the private sector, because there's a chart there I have in this slide. It's from a fact sheet that we had released about the Nagoya Protocol about 10 years ago, but I think the facts in the fact sheet are still as relevant as they were now then as today. I can paste a link to the fact sheet in the chat box, but the thing is, I think if you look at these numbers and the amounts of money involved, these numbers are very eye-catching, and you start to build some expectations around benefit sharing. But I think it also needs to come with some context, because many of these industries have huge R&D costs and extremely long timelines and complicated pathways to get products to market. So there's a lot of context that needs to be explained in terms of expectations. So I think that's another important point for the private sector. That picture is also a very unexpected picture. That's why I included it, because it without communication, I mean, you can do some risky things, but you need a lot of clarity and a lot of reliability, basically, and trust to do those kind of risky dance moves in that picture. So the next thing I want to talk about is the ABS Clearinghouse, and it's a very key tool for making communication happen. It's established in the protocol as a source of reliable information. It provides information to on key contacts like national focal points and competent national authorities. It helps countries, it allows them a place where they can explain ABS rules and procedures on how to access genetic resources. It also provides sort of a mechanism to help monitor genetic resources once they have left the country of access, and where they're being used and what's happening to them. The ABS Clearinghouse provides sort of a middleman where they can receive updates about what's happening on their genetic resources. I mean, it's also a place for the private sector and other users to share information on codes of conduct, guidelines, and best practices. You can see it's a website there at the bottom of the screen, absch.cvd.int. I'll just mention that the people coming to this website, to the ABS Clearinghouse, most of them are users looking for information. We also have a help desk that you can chat with people on the website. So if you have a question, you can type it in there, and if it's during normal business hours in Montreal, we can try to respond to it right away. If we don't, we email you back. But one thing I can mention is that a lot of questions we get from users, and it's a little bit more on the complaint side. And basically what they really want to know is how can they access genetic resources in country X? And they say the information on ABS Clearinghouse is not available, it can't be found, or they say the focal points are ignoring my requests for information. There's no clear ways to find procedures for access. So this is something that we're also trying to work on. I think a lot of countries are still, we're only 10 years old, so we're still developing these ABS systems that are legal frameworks that take a lot of time to implement and operationalize. So yeah, it's a slow process, but we're getting there. And one of the things we do from the Secretariat is try to encourage countries and engage with them to promote, to proactively populate the ABS clearinghouse. So I'll just mention one specific tool on the ABS clearinghouse that could be very helpful for the private sector or users is something called ABS procedures. So if you look at those pictures, those are very visual step-by-step guides to understand the different types of dances. So it can help a lot to know the steps before you start dancing. And it's the same thing for ABS procedures. ABS procedures on the ABS clearinghouse are a place where countries can share step-by-step guides to guide users through the process to get PIC and MAT and the ABS rules and procedures to get eventual access to genetic resources. So they can set up their procedures so you can see different types based on different types of uses. For example, perhaps there's different procedures for non-commercial use versus commercial use, or different types of genetic resources, or different types of users, like foreign or domestic users. And they basically try to answer key questions about who do I submit my applications to, how long will it take, what are the prerequisites, what are the fees. So this is a very pragmatic, practical sort of information to find on the clearinghouse. And this is one of the things that we're really trying to encourage countries to populate. So that's basically it. I only had a few minutes for this presentation, but at the end, I think it's important to share the eventual benefits fairly and equity from the utilization of genetic resources. And this is really a key tool in the conventions of the convention's sort of objectives to support conservation and sustainable development. I think that the protocol, like I said, is quite young. It's only 10 years old, and we all know how teenage years can be kind of rough. But at the same time, the teenage years are a good time to make mistakes. They're a good time to learn from your mistakes. They're a good time to gain experience and try things and push things a little. And I think ABS is a little like dancing. It takes practice, but it's something that you do get better at with time. So thank you very much. I think that's it. I'll I don't know how to stop sharing my screen. I'm sorry. So maybe Augustina, you could do that.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Matthew, for setting the ABS scene, for reminding us about the key ingredients in successful ABS agreements, for encouraging us to dance, the Nagoya Protocol dance. I want a copy of some of your slides, particularly one of the last ones showing the steps, the different types of tests. That will be useful. That will be useful. Let's move on. We are going to start the first part of the session, in which we will learn from national countries' experiences together with private sector experiences, negotiating and getting to an agreement for the acquisition and use of genetic resources or natural resources from those particular countries. First in our list is Vietnam, but as far as I know, our Vietnamese colleagues haven't been able to connect yet. If that's not the case, if they are already online, perhaps Agustina, Alejandro, just give me a sign. Otherwise, we'll invite our panelists from South Africa to tell us about their experience. South Africa is a very interesting country from the ABS point of view because it has a pretty large number of commercial permits. Overall, it has a modest number of ABS permits, but most of them are commercial ones. So at least I personally am eager to learn the features of South Africa that make it particularly attractive from a ABS point of view to commercial companies. From this country, we have Mrs. Letitia, and this is a challenging surname. I may leave you pronounce it. I'm going to try. Sitwa Mulomoni, who's the Deputy Director at the Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries, and is also the co-chair of the ad hoc technical expert group on digital sequence information and genetic resources under the CBD. She's going to tell us about the special features of the ABS system in South Africa. And together with Mrs. Letitia, we have Mrs. Heather Ducharme, who's the head of sustainable materials procurement at Body Shop. And following Letitia, she will tell us her experience, her case, her knowledge of the South Africa country in relation to ABS permits and agreements. So please, Letitia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Isabel. You actually pronounced my surname very well. It is Chito Muromoni. Yeah, it's quite a long surname. I know that Alejandro today has learned something. and thanks for the opportunity to share the key features of the ABS national legislation in South Africa. So in terms of the South African situation, South Africa has implemented the national ABS legislation for more than a decade through the National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act and the Bioprospecting Access and Benefit Sharing regulations, which have generated a wealth of practical implementation experiences. And therefore, these legislative tools are being reviewed to further align them to the requirements of a dynamic ABS environment, in addition to the practical realities. So the regulatory requirements in South Africa apply to commercial or industrial sectors that utilizes indigenous biological resources for research, product development and commercialization activities under a broad term, bioprospecting. I think that's the term that you will always come across as you read through our national ABS legislations. So these sectors include medicinal, nutraceutical, flavors, fragrances, cosmetics, and agricultural, just to give an example of the sectors that we are regulating in South Africa. And interestingly, South Africa is both a provider and a user of indigenous biological resources and their associated traditional knowledge for bioprospecting purposes. So these sectors are regulated through permitting system, which requires protection of rights and interest of the custodians of biodiversity and holders of associated traditional knowledge. So as such, with the permit system in place, the foreign permit applicants who can be categorized as users within the Nagoya Protocol language are required to apply for a permit jointly with a South African-based entity. So that's one requirement that is provided in our national ABS system. However, the permit application documentation, it must include proof of prior informed consent obtained, the negotiated and concluded material transfer agreement and benefit sharing agreement with the provider of indigenous biological resources, and where applicable with the holders of associated traditional knowledge. So the benefits are shared through the Bioprospecting Trust Fund established by the National Competent Authority. And within this regulatory and permitting system, we do have prescribed timeframes to process the permit application. So the National Competent Authority is expected to process and finalize a decision on all permit application within 120 working days. And for your information, the National Competent Authority in South Africa is the National Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries. So all permits that are involving bioprospecting goes to one department, which is the National Department. And I think, as Isabel has indicated, to date, we have issued 110 permits to various entities. And these permits are supported by 189 benefit sharing agreements. And these benefit sharing agreements, in terms of the benefit sharing arrangement contained in them, they are generally in monetary and non-monetary terms. So importantly, I think in my conclusion, I would like to indicate that partnership and collaboration between the National Competent Authority, industry, and communities are very crucial for effective implementation of ABS regulatory requirements. And in this case, the role of the National Competent Authority in South Africa is not only to regulate ABS, but also to provide guidance and facilitate partnerships and collaborations with relevant stakeholders as an incentive to promote and ensure ABS compliance. So you are also going to hear a specific experience from the company that was granted ABS permit in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Letizia, very much. I understand that during or before Heather's presentation, we will have a short video. Alejandro, Heather, I leave this in your hands.
If we could just wait for the video, I'll say a few things first, Alejandro, and then we can move on to the video, if that's all right.
Let's do so. Let's do so, Heather. Please go ahead.
Good. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you very much. And hello to everyone on the line. It's really nice to be here today. And thank you to the organizers, the CBD staff, for inviting me to come speak together with Letizia. And thank you very much, Letizia, for such an excellent and clear introduction to the overall legal framework in South Africa. So my name is Heather Ducharme. As you know, I work for The Body Shop, which is part of Natura & Co., which is a global cosmetics business, a cosmetics retailer. The Body Shop, you may know the brand, you may not, but we sell cosmetic products in shops around the world, about 3,000 shops, and it has a UK headquarters, and I'm speaking to you today from the UK. So The Body Shop has a long commitment to ethical and sustainable sourcing in our ingredient supply chains, and we are guided in that part of our business by something we call the Sustainable Sourcing Charter. And in that charter, we have a clear commitment to the Nagoya Protocol, to access and benefit sharing, both in terms of compliance with the law and the growing body of national legislation around the world, but also to the spirit of access and benefit sharing. And it's worth saying that The Body Shop has a long, although we, as a retailer of finished cosmetic goods that are manufactured by our suppliers, we don't directly buy ingredients. We don't directly we don't directly buy raw materials from communities or develop ingredients from plants. That's not part of our business model. But we do have a program of work we've called Community Fair Trade for over 30 years, where we do work and have relationships with our supplier communities, the producers on the ground around the world. And our approach to access and benefit sharing is really guided by the philosophy of community fair trade, which is to benefit people, to drive positive impact through our sourcing practices. So when ABS came along and the Nagoya Protocol came along to the party, to the dance, we felt, I think, that it was very much in line with our existing company values and practices in some of our ingredient supply chains. And since we've become part of Natura & Co, and you'll hear from my colleague Anna Viana a little bit later this afternoon with Natura, since we've become part of Natura and that we work together with them, it's only strengthened our commitment to the Nagoya Protocol, and partly because Natura has a very long-standing and strong program on ABS compliance in Brazil, which you'll hear about. So I'm here to speak really specifically about our work in South Africa. We do have some compliance activities and ABS work in other countries, but I'll only focus on the case study that has been published and is available online on the UEBT website, the Union for Ethical Biotrade, if you want to read the details in full. And it's about the perfume product, a fragrance product that the Body Shop had on the market. It's actually no longer on the market, but we had on the market that was inspired by a species of cedar that is endemic to the Cedarburg mountainous region in the Cape region of South Africa. The Witringtonia species, Witringtonia cedarburgensis, if I'm saying that correctly. And we had a perfume product that we sold that was used a fragrance that was developed by our supplier, a fragrance company based in South Africa, where they captured the essence of the cedar tree, and then developed a synthetic fragrance that we used in the actual product that we sold. So it used something called headspace technology, which is a particular kind of fragrance development technology. And I'm going to ask now that Alejandro shows the video, because it'll give you a little sense of how that technology works, and I think it's actually useful to see. At the end of the video, you'll see an actual picture of the Witringtonia cedar tree, so look for it. It's only a 1-minute video.
Our headspace technology was developed in the 1970s by Roman Kaiser. It's totally different to the traditional techniques like distillation, extraction, or enfleurage, which destroy the flower. Our headspace technique allows us to capture the authentic scent of rare flowers without causing any damage to nature. And it's this that makes it particularly suited to the ethos of the Body Shop. You may never be able to see the Nigritella flower in its native Swiss mountains, but you can experience the scent of this flower through the headspace technology. And as a botanist, I love the fact that they've kept the Latin name of the plant for the name of the fragrance.
So that's it, if you can still hear me. That was, it's just a brief promotional video for the product range that was on the shelf. It was actually launched about 5 years ago now, I think in 2016. And it's actually moved on. It's a fast-moving consumer goods business that we're in, and so we launch products and then they get pulled off the shelf. So this sort of has been through its full product life cycle already, the Witringtonia and the other fragrances in that range. In terms of the ABS situation, I think just a few quick facts. We as the Body Shop, we jointly applied for a biotrade and bioprospecting permit from the South African government with our supplier, the fragrance house Givaudan. And we were granted that permit in 2018, which is great. It's worth saying that the discussions around whether we were in scope of ABS legislation, which parts of the supply chain were in scope of the legislation, whether the technology itself triggered the legislation in South Africa, they were taking place about 3 years before we were granted the permit itself. So there was quite a long process, quite a long, I'm thinking very much of Matthew's very funny comparison to an awkward dance. There was quite a lot of dancing going on and quite a lot of learning to dance together in different parties of the supply chain, all the way from the South African government and the communities living in the area where the Windrintonia cedar grows, and the organizations on the ground who are trying to protect it. It's an endangered species. And then obviously with the full commercial side of the supply chain, which was the fragrance houses and the body shop and all the legal advisors who go along with that. So there was a lot of conversation before we finally got to the point of saying, yes, we need to apply for a permit. This is the type of permit we need to apply for. This is how we're going to apply for it. And then to develop and agree and sign off on a benefit sharing contract, which we did sign off on, and that we have now started to implement, or rather the organizations in South Africa have started to implement with the benefit sharing funding that the Body Shop has provided last year. So those activities on the ground are just starting to move forward now, which is that we're funded by the benefit sharing agreement, which is great news. We're very happy that they're moving forward, but it was a long time coming, is all I'll say. So a couple of issues. One of the questions that was asked to comment on, and I'll be quite brief because I realize I've probably gone over my allotted 5 minutes, but a few kind of reflections or lessons learned, if they're of interest to policymakers around this private sector government dance with ABS. From our point of view, definitely would reinforce the message that Leticia mentioned around collaboration and partnership. This was very much a collective effort with parties along the whole supply chain. And without the concerted and persistent efforts of organizations like UEBT, who helped facilitate conversations between the private sector, the government, and then the government itself in South Africa, facilitating discussions with local organizations and local communities, we would not have achieved this. So I think partnership and collaboration is really important. Things from a private sector point of view to kind of keep in mind for policymakers, I would say, is one of the things we struggled with here and in other places, not just in South Africa, is our supply chains are quite complex. We don't, in fragrance particularly, in the cosmetic sector, fragrance is particularly a complex area because you're often dealing with supply chains where there's, in one simple ingredient, there's many players, many different plant species, many different components, many different origins, and a lot of concern around commercial confidentiality. So it really slows things down in terms of trying to figure out what are the ABS obligations in the supply chain. So as much as is humanly possible, we would ask policymakers and legislators to really be as clear as you can around which parties in a complex, long supply chain are responsible for what activities in ABS compliance, who talks to the communities, who pays benefits, who is in and out of scope of an ABS obligation. It's hard to find one size fits all, but these are often areas where conversations get bogged down. Timelines, we've talked about this lots. As I pointed out in the case study with Windrintonia, the product was launched, sold, and then off the shelf before we actually have delivered benefit sharing activities in the community. That's normal in our industry. And so even though I think we're a kind of company that's committed to and understands that ABS and dialogue amongst stakeholders in supply chain takes time, and if you want to do it well, it takes effort. The reality is that the commercial cycle is really quick relative to the ABS cycle. So the more that process can be simplified, streamlined, clarified up front, the easier it is to kind of deliver meaningful benefits within the lifetime of a product. And then I guess the only other thing I would say, I mean, I definitely resonated when Matthew was talking about expectations management. I think that's very true. People look at a big company like the Body Shop and think there's loads of money. It's always a difficult conversation, but I think the more clear the legislation can be on the responsibilities on the supply chain, the easier it will be to manage everybody's expectations, including unreasonable business expectations, if there are any. I would say that one of the things that I'm personally have to deal with quite a lot is there's increasing regulatory pressure in sustainability on businesses for supply chain due diligence on social and environmental issues. that's welcome and a good development, I think, for the planet and for people. But I don't see that the ABS community, because it comes out of the CBD perhaps, or I'm not entirely sure, is really plugged in or aligning with the other regulatory developments around supply chain due diligence on social and environmental conditions in supply chains, and transparency and traceability in your supply chains, all of which is very much aligned, and it's the same people in businesses who have to deal with those questions. So the more that those regulatory initiatives can align with each other, the easier it will be for business to comply, and the less frustration and duplication you'll probably end up with for everybody. So that's all I've got to say. Sorry, I'm going to stop now. Isabel?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I was about to interrupt you, but at the same time, I think that all your points were very, very interesting and useful for this dialogue. Thank you and Letizia for your interventions. I would like to then move to Vietnam. Let's travel around the world. Let's go to Vietnam, where Mrs. Nan Thi Tan Hoang, who's the Nagoya Protocol national focal point in this country, is going to tell us about the key features of the ABS system in Vietnam. And also she will share with us the main lessons learned under the negotiation of the first commercial permit for Vietnam on ABS, granted to the big company BASF. Mrs. Nan Thi Tan Hoang, if you are online, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and evening. I'm here in Vietnam, and now it's at midnight, near midnight in Hanoi. Thank you, organizers, for inviting me to this interesting online conference on ABS. So my name is Nhan Hoang Thi Thanh. I'm Deputy Director of Natural and Biodiversity Conservation Agency, Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment in Vietnam. So I'm very glad to share some information on our ABS system and also some practice on ABS in our country. So can you turn on my slide, my presentation? Thank you very much. Okay, so in my presentation, I would like to provide a very brief on our system on ABS. Got given a very short time, so I try to make it short. Please. So Vietnam became member to the Convention on Biological Diversity in 1994 and became the party to Nagoya Protocol on ABS in 2014. And in our country, there are different regulations on ABS, including the biodiversity law. This law adopted before the Nagoya Protocol came into force, and the decree 59, and also to circular 15/2019 and circular 10/2020. So this regulation set the legal environment for ABS mechanism in Vietnam. So in the law on biodiversity, it set very general terms because it already adopted before the Nagoya Protocol, but all issues relevant to the ABS and detailed guidance under the Decree 59. Next, please. So the scope of this decree applied to all the rendered resources being assessed for utilization purpose, including biochemical compounds and derivatives thereof. And in this document, doesn't cover the rendered resource for direct use, and also doesn't mention in detail about traditional knowledge. Next, please. So for the competent authorities who provide permits for access rendered resource in Vietnam, there are two agencies. The first agency is the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, who is responsible for to regulate the access to rendered resource of plant varieties, livestock breeds, aquatic species, and forest seedlings. And the second one is the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, who is responsible for granting permits for access to all other cases, including wild rendered resources, microorganisms, etc. Next, please. So all the procedures already mentioned or stipulated in the document. So in different requirement for research for non-commercial purpose, and research and products development for commercial purpose, and also the transfer rendered resource out of the country. So for the foreign organizers who need to access the rendered resource for commercial purpose, they need to have a cooperation agreement with science technology organizations in Vietnam. Next, please. So this is a diagram to show the quite a complicated procedure for getting the license and permits. But it's quite clear in our documents. I think for the given time, I don't explain it in detail, but if you need to get further information or further understanding, you may contact us. Next, please. So the document, the legal document, also set out the benefit sharing mechanism, including the non-monetary benefits and monetary benefits, which should be shared between the from the provider to user, from user to provider. Next, please. So in our document, there are some transition clause. As I mentioned, in our legal system, we have a biodiversity law, which already regulates some general article on ABS. This document enacted in 2009, and the second important document is the Decree 59, which come into force into effect in 2019. So before 2009, there's no requirement for registration required. But between the 2009 and 2017, the access and use rendered resource without ABS license, if continue having the demand on using rendered resource, registration to obtain the ABS license is required. So in some case, the user that already set the rendered resource before the 2017, they need to register for the rated resource they already assessed. Next, please. So in short, some highlight for APS for commercial purpose. So permission is required before assessing. A minimum monetary benefit sharing of 1% revenue is required. And for getting the license or permit, the appraisal time is required up to 90 days. The validity of the license to assess rated resource is 3 years. So after 3 years, if they want to continue assess rated resources, they need to apply for more time. The obligation to share benefit continues under APS contract even after the license expires. And up to now, Vietnam has issued 2 APS licenses for commercial purpose. Next, please. And I would like to provide to share some information on the first case on APS in Vietnam. This is the case with bus. This is the assessor rated resource from a perennial plants in Lamiaceae family, native for several Asian countries and highly valued in traditional medicine. So this is the purpose for commercial use is a potential for the development of cosmetic ingredients. And the provider is from Vietnam country, and the user is from the company from France. So the actor here is a resource provider, is a local private company specialized in cultivation of organic agricultural products. They harvest product grown in their land and export. Competent national authorities, Ministry of Natural Resources, Environment, because this ministry is responsible for granting permits for wide rated resource. And at the legal document requirement, the national collaborators to the DISA is the Center for Rural Economy and Development, CRED. And the DISA in this case, BAP Beauty Care Solution France. So this guy take time to get the license for assess beneficial rated resource assess and come up with the benefit sharing mechanism, and the monetary benefits correspond to 1% of the year revenue of cosmetic ingredient developed directly from the asset to genetic resources of the assessor. Of this aforementioned monetary benefits, 50% is reserved for the provider to finance community development projects through improving working conditions or life quality of local communities, or biodiversity conservation project, or enhance agricultural practice related to genetic resources. And 50% is paid to state budget, and this should be reinvest for conservation in the country. So this first case in Vietnam on APS, and through this case, there are some lessons learned. I think for us, and we would like to share with you that because it is first case, so there's a lot of communication will be take place, and to get common understanding, and also both sides need to have the trust in each other, and also because the procedure also need the time. So sometimes I think the user also need to be very patient to follow the guidance of the authority, the competent authority. But at the end, the contract has was signed and the benefit has been shared. So I think this is a very successful case for ABS in Vietnam. So in Vietnam, we already have the website for ABS. So I think the information available on the website on ABS also very important for different parties and stakeholders to understand more about the regulations and policy and procedures. From our experience, a lot of parties and partners, they visited our website. You can see it's vietnamabs.gov.vn, and they get information from there, including the information on different competent authorities and contacts. So the information, transparent information also very important for different stakeholders on the ABS regime. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks. Thank you, Nan Nguyen, for being with us today, particularly when it's so late in Vietnam. Thanks a million for having joining the session today and for staying with us until so late your time. And of course, thanks for sharing these experiences with us. Very, very interesting. I see that the questions and answers section is becoming quite active, and I encourage everyone to keep formulating your questions there. Now we are going to move to Latin America. We have some colleagues from Brazil. Brazil is not a party to the Nagoya Protocol yet, but it's a reference, has always been a reference in ABS. Has a large experience in the new laws adopted recently, and the implementation of these laws in the last 5 years have become a reference for the continent, probably for the world, and have introduced some innovative aspects that are worth considering. From Brazil, we have Mr. José Renato de Barcelos Ferreira, who's the Deputy Director of the Department of Genetic Heritage at the Ministry of Environment. He will tell us, he will introduce us to the ABS system in Brazil and the approach that the country has taken in relation to commercial access. And also from Brazil, we have Mrs. Ana Viana, who's the regulatory, who works at the regulatory affairs at Natura as a manager. She oversees the implementation of legislation on access and to genetic heritage and associated traditional knowledge, access and benefit sharing policies, Nagoya Protocol, and other topics related to bioinnovation. Anna will explain us the experience with the implementation of the Brazilian ABS system from a private sector perspective. So let's go first with José Renato and then with Anna. Thank you both, and the floor is yours.
Okay.
José Renato,
yes.
Cannot hear you. Now we can, and we can see.
Oh, hello. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance. I'm here to talk a little about the Brazilian legislation on ABS. Okay. Sorry. Talk about the Brazilian legislation historical. We have an ABS legislation since the year 2000, when the provisional measure number 2186 was published and came into force for 14 years. This ABS legislation received lots of critics because of its excessive, bureaucratic, and hard to follow rules. During this period, it was mandatory, a prior authorization to begin research. The Brazilian researchers remained mainly outside of the system because of this difficulty. And there were few numbers of benefit sharing contracts. And in the final, we had the criminalization of the activities carried out by companies and researchers. With the new legislation of the law 13,123 of 2015 and the decree 8,772 of 2016, the focus now changes to the result of the access. So you don't need a prior authorization to begin research. The finished product is the one that guarantees the traceability of all the previous chains, starting from the access to the genetic heritage. Now we have an environment that is more conducive to innovation, and we seek for the strengthening of production chains related to standing forest. Next, please. So to illustrate the difficulties of old Brazilian legislation, since the establishment of the Genetic Heritage Management Council, the CGEN, in 2003, we only had 2,307 permits grants for researchers in Brazil. As I mentioned before, to begin a research, you need an authorization granted by the CGEN. Next, please. And nowadays, with the new legislation and with the electronic system that is responsible for the registration of the access activities arising from Brazilian genetic research, that is called the CISGEN, we had during 3 years of its existence 29,550 users registered on the system. That is the researchers and the companies had. We also had 57,108 access registries. That is equivalent to prior informed consent, we pick. We also have 1,328 shipments of samples registries in the system. And finally, we have 2,873 product notifications. That is equivalent to multilingual terms or MET. So you can find this information on the CGEN website, but they are only available in Portuguese. So we expect to notify this information to the clearinghouse when Brazil finally ratifies the Nagoya Protocol. So this increase can be explained because the CGEN is a self-reporting system where users and companies can aggregate information about their research, the sending samples, or notifying the new products made from the Brazilian genetic heritage. Next, please. So in the Brazilian legislation, the benefit sharing can be done in 2 ways, monetary or non-monetary. About the monetary benefit sharing, that is equivalent to 1% of annual net revenue from sales of products that use Brazilian genetic resources, they must be collected to the National Benefit Sharing Fund. So this fund starts its operation in this year of 2020 and must be calculated after the close of each fiscal year. Until now, we have 2.5 million reais, that is equivalent to 500,000 US dollars, available in the National Benefit Sharing Fund, and more than 10,000 million reais, that is equivalent to 2 million US dollars, that are expected to be deposited in the next months in the National Beneficiary Fund. To regulate the use of this amount, we have the National Beneficiary Fund Management Board that has the participation of government and traditional indigenous people with the same proportional on decision. On the other side, if the company chooses the non-monetary benefit sharing, it has to present a conservation project or a technological transfer, and the allocation must be equivalent to 0.75% of the annual net revenue from the sales of the products arising from the utilization of the genetic resource. Until now, we have received 42 projects present by companies in a total of 19 million reais. That is equivalent to 3.8 million US dollars. If a company uses traditional knowledge associated to genetic heritage, you have two types of benefit sharing. When the traditional knowledge is not identifiable, that is, when you do not know the origin of that knowledge, the company must deposit 1% of its annual net revenue to the National Benefit Sharing Fund. And when the traditional knowledge is identifiable, the company must deposit 0.5% of its annual net revenue in the National Benefit Sharing Fund and must present a benefit sharing agreement with the community that holds that knowledge. This benefit sharing agreement shall be negotiated in a fair and equitable way between the parties, meeting clarity, loyalty, and transparency parameters agreed to in a contractual clauses indicating conditions, obligations, types, and duration of benefits. The federal agencies and bodies responsible for the protection of rights, assisting or for promoting activities for indigenous people, traditional communities, and traditional farmers must, as per request of the holders, assist in the activities related to obtaining prior informed consent and in the negotiation of benefit sharing agreements. And for last, in the case of the competitiveness of the production sector is affected with the application of the 1% share of the annual net income, the companies may request a sectorial agreement. So after the analysis of the government, the dual monetary benefit sharing can be reduced up to 0.1% instead of 1%. But until now, we didn't receive any request. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for this detailed presentation, informative one. Ana Viana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you all for the invitation. As you know, my name is Ana Viana. Please, could you, yeah, thank you. My name is Ana Viana, and I work in the regulatory department in Natura Cosmetics. And I have been working with the Brazilian biodiversity law over 10 years. I have had the opportunity to participate in many discussions and working in agreements and projects using the benefit sharing. Next, please. Natura is a Brazilian company, and after the union with Aesop, The Body Shop, and Avon, this group became the fourth largest cosmetics companies in the world. But to understand the context of Natura's experience with ABS, it's important to know that one of its innovations drivers is to research, develop ingredients and cosmetics products with the Brazilian biodiversity. Because of that, since 2001, when the first Brazilian national law on ABS was enforced, we have been learning a lot on how to do fair and equitable benefit sharing and promoting conservation projects from it. During the last few years, Natura has been the company that negotiates the largest number of benefit sharing contracts in Brazil. Next, please. But today, I'm going to share with you about one ABS agreement we consider to be very successful. It's important to explain that this agreement, this specific agreement, was signed during the first law, not the law that Jose explained now, okay? The law that we have in the past, that we had in the past. The Provisional Act number 2186, it was the number of the law, okay? The key element of this MAT was the creation of a fund for sharing the revenues earned by Natura products using Andiroba oil and Murumuru butter. Remember that Andiroba and Murumuru are native species from Brazil. This fund was implemented in Médio Juruá River territory and invests in projects for conservation, sustainable use of biodiversity, and local livelihoods. Next, please. In this fund has a management committee who is responsible for identifying, selecting, following the implementation of the projects, and to ensure accountability. And all stakeholders participate in this committee, as you see in this photo. Community is the most important part in this committee. Natura and government, for example, ICMBio is a government department who helps us to implement this kind of project. Next. The projects are proposed by social organizations of the Médio Juruá River territory that are suitable to receive ABS resources and include capacity building, improvement to local infrastructure, empowerment of local, and conservation of forestry areas and species. After this presentation, I'm going to share a video to understand a little bit more about this kind of project with conservation of forest areas and species. But in terms of extent, in 2017, the project has selected 4 organizations representing 485 families from 42 communities. While in 2018, the number of communities involved are more than double. Next, please. We have a very, very little time to share this with you. And I am in the end of my little presentation. And I want to conclude that we know about the challenges that we are going to have, but we need to work and build together solutions for conservation of biodiversity and forestry economy. It is very, very important. We know the challenges that we have with the law, to understand the law. For this kind of project, we need a lot of help. We work together with the government, with another partners to help us to understand the law and to put these projects in practice. But we believe that this kind of fund is a very, very good format to include more people and increase the transparency of whole process for the stakeholders. And we have to work and build together solutions for conservation of biodiversity and the forestry economy. Thank you all. I had a problem here. I have a problem here with my cat. But thank you all. Please, Isabel, can you put the...
Cuido do tabuleiro de quelônios há 22 anos. Eu resolvi preservar porque os filhos dos nossos filhos não iam nem conhecer uma tartaruga porque estava acabando.
Faz 15 anos que eu coleto andiroba. A floresta é o meu sustento. Tem o murumuru, tem a andiroba, a roça, tudo depende dela.
quanto mais parceiros vinha chegando, para nós seria melhor. E a gente está conseguindo.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ana Viana, also for sharing this video. And thanks, Jose Renato. I would like to let you know that there are some questions for you guys in the question and answer section. So if you want to go there and see the questions and also try to respond them in writing, that would be appreciated. So we move from Natura to another cosmetic company, in this case, Provital. It's a company from Spain, and the CEO of this Spanish company, called Mr. Ricard Armengo, is going to share his experience with us now, telling us particularly about the experience of the company in Mexico and the challenges they are facing in general with the implementation of their own ABS policy. It is interesting to highlight that this was the first cosmetic ingredient supplier worldwide to achieve an international recognized certificate of compliance in the ABS clearinghouse. So yes, it's a company with long experience and with a rich one. So Ricard, we look forward to what you want to share with us. You are muted, Ricard. Can you unmute? No. Agustina, can you please help with unmuting Ricard?
Of course. Now, Ricard, you should see a message to activate your audio.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Okay, I lost.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I lost the control of my mouse. Sorry. Okay. Well, thanks, Isabel, for your kind introduction, and thanks also for allowing me to be present at this global ABS conference. Well, let me first start with some initial points to help explaining our experience. So first, Provital is a Spanish company which are devoted to research and commercialize active ingredients for the cosmetic industry. So we are not producing final cosmetic products, but only ingredients. We are not a big company. We are a small, medium enterprise. And as Isabel has mentioned, we were in 2017, we were the first company of cosmetic ingredient suppliers in having an international recognized certificate of compliance. And furthermore, this was achieved in Mexico, which is a country that at that moment was and still is developing the specific legal framework. So we really, Mexico gave us the access permit with a transient procedure based on the old legislation. And really, it didn't take so long. So when we started the process officially, it was June 2016. We applied for the collecting permit in July 2017, and we had the official certificate published in the website of the clearinghouse in October 2017. So we are talking only of about a year and a half, not more than this. And so it's not a long time for a project, and under these circumstances. And before entering more into detail, I would also mention some specific interesting points of the sector, of the cosmetic sector. So really, in the cosmetics, the natural compounds, the sustainability, the fair trade, all these concepts are really very important for us and are really very present in the market because the consumer accepts this and demands for it many times. And we, as companies working in this sector, we are really quite fast in reacting to these social moves. Then, second point is that the companies doing research from natural genetic resources are usually the suppliers of ingredients, not the final cosmetic producers. Well, in some cases, such as Natura, we have seen right now with Anna, they are doing their own research, but usually the research is done by the suppliers. That means that the market is not so big, and the gains that can be obtained there from the benefit sharing are not so good, not so great. So here it's also related to the comment that it has been done previously on the expectations on what can be achieved from this. On the other side, there's an advantage of this research being done by companies such as mine, because if a company producing cosmetics develops a product in the market based on a specific compound, a specific plant, the shelf life of this product in the market is quite short. So, for instance, Heather from Body Shop, she mentioned that the product that they developed for based on a flower, it's no longer in the market. But in our case, the shelf life in the market is longer. So we can have the same product in the market during 10 years or 15 or even more. And this is an advantage. So lower volumes, but longer time. Also to be mentioned that in the cosmetics industry, R&D, it takes some time. It's not so fast. It's not, of course, it's not so long time as in the pharmaceutical industry, but it takes 4 or 5 years to develop a new ingredient. For instance, we started this research in 2017, and we will be only able to launch our ingredient next year. So it will take 4 years for us to develop this. And this is also important that it's clearly explained, because otherwise you create expectations of volumes quite fast, and it's not the case. And also the producers of raw materials are usually not big companies. Well, there are some of them like BASF that we have been learned from Vietnam. They have now a project, but usually the companies are medium-sized companies, and it means that we do not have big structures. We do not have big resources in terms of money or people of people to manage complicated regulatory issues as ABS is. So this is important specific points to be mentioned on the cosmetic sector. So going back to the project that we had in Mexico, the advantage for us was that we were already working in Mexico in a rural development project since 2013. So we were for 4 years already working with a group of farmers, which is called Mujeres y Ambiente, a group of women in a community in the center of Mexico. And also we were working in collaboration with the University of Querétaro. And when we decided then to initiate this new R&D project, and we decided that this new one would be according to the Nagoya Protocol, we really had a very good network and infrastructure there in Mexico. And basically, we were already a group of people who were knowing each other, and the most important, we were trusting each other. And trust is an important word here, and trust must be earned, and it takes time also. Well, anyway, when we started the project, it was like, wow, that's gonna be a big bet, and it won't be easy at all, but let's try, or let's dance, as Matthew says before. So we started the project and we said, well, trust is important word here, but there are other words also that are very important for the good success of a project. And it's engagement or commitment. These are important words also. And you need this engagement from all the actors involved in the project. So, and in this case, a specific case, we had a big engagement and commitment from this group of farmers from Mujeres y Ambiente. They were able to attract and convince people and farmers from other 3 communities. So the initial project that was only with them, now it's a much wider project affecting 3 different communities in this area. We had also the engagement and the commitment of a strong working group at the University of Querétaro with a long-term collaboration with these communities. in other or existing projects on the field. And we had also a very good and very important engagement of the local authorities and the national focal point at that moment, Mrs. Daveturia Fernandez in the Semarnat. So that was important. And another word that is also important for the success of any project is professionalism. So we have to take care of the project and take it from a professional point of view. And in this project specifically, we counted on a local team of experts who were in charge of the project, and they were a biologist specialized in ecosystem management and a lawyer specialized in environmental regulations. And that was also crucial for the project, sorry. And then support. Support is another important word. And this is what we achieved and what we get from the UNDP team in Mexico. It really supported us a lot, and it helped a lot and made things very much easier. And finally, sincerity and sincere interest from the company. And now I put my company here. So really, for Provital, there's we are really believing in fair share in business. And we believe that working in that way is the only way of working when we work on natural products. So this is very important also. The company has to really feel that this is important and this is something that must be done. Not because the laws are mandatory, but because you really feel that is how it has to be. And well, the project was really successful. We were really very happy of the results. This is still alive. We haven't been able still to get the product in the market. It's close to the launching, but it's evolving. It's a live project, and we are already thinking in increasing and starting a new one, because really the results are very, very good in all senses. And from all this, we have got some thoughts that it could be useful for thinking for other people, maybe. So how can be this done, or how can it be improved in general? So for me, one of the things that we should try to improve in ABS regulations application is that we should give value to this for the companies. So and how we can get this? We should be able to obtain to increase the consumer awareness of the Nagoya Protocol, because if the consumer knows about this and demands the companies to run on this way, the industry will follow, because the industry wants to make money, and if the consumer is demanding something, they will do it. So do not forget that the consumer is who really decides the steps that the industry is taking, not on the opposite. Another important point that should be improved is the simplification. As I mentioned, the companies, well, we have some big companies working on this, but we have many other companies that are smaller, and we do not have the resources to manage very complicated regulatory issues. So authorities should try to simplify at maximum all the steps needed, and this would help a lot. And also avoiding legal uncertainties. What we do not want as a company is risking in having problems in the middle of the project. So we want to be sure when we start that the things will go in some direction. And that's very important also, that the authorities are able to reassure the companies in this sense. And understanding, a mutual understanding is very important. So both the companies, we need to really understand the needs of the authorities. We need to understand that the authorities are fighting for their own interest, of their interest of the country. But the authorities, the local authorities, should understand also what the companies can do, what the companies can provide, and what the companies do need, because really it's different world. It's a very different world, both sides, and I think it's very, very important that both sides arrive to a good comprehension of this. And regarding the authorities, they should also know the supply chain in each sector. For instance, as Heather mentioned, also the supply chain in cosmetics is quite complex. So it should be known by the authorities that who are doing the R&D is the supplier, the ingredient producer, that this goes then to a kind of supply with different intermediates till arriving to the last point in the consumer market. And if we arrive to know all this, we will all understand that the partnering is very important for us, for both the companies, for both the authorities, but also for the farmers and all the teams involved. A partner is the only way to achieve success in a project like this. Yeah. And the last point, we should be able to measure the results. And this is something that is lacking usually in the projects. We should be able to define some KPIs, some indicators that allow us to know really which are the results of all these projects. It's something that allows us not to only say nice words, but to really demonstrate with figures what we have obtained with this project. And this should be mandatory to introduce in all these projects. So this is something that we have understood right now, and we are now starting to measure which are the results that we are getting in this project, and how we can measure in the next following years the results that we will obtain this. Okay. And well, that was all. That was a quite brief resume of the project and some ideas on how things can be improved in general on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricard. That was really helpful and a very nice, passionate way you had of explaining your experience and expressing your expectations. It is interesting to see the alignment among the different private sector speakers on the elements that they found important in their experiences. Partnership, good partnerships, transparency, mutual understanding, good communication, commitment with core values beyond making money, attention to the whole value chain up to the consumer. And it's also very interesting to see your alignment also in relation to the expectations and the preferences, simplicity in the norms, predictability, understanding of respective expectations, missions, capacities of the private sector or the public sector. So yeah, it is good to see how the different positions are being reinforced and how this is leading to a constructive dialogue, I feel. But I'm not here to speak more. It's tempting, but I can't. From the experience of cosmetic companies, I would like to invite the representative of the Union for Ethical Biotrade to join us now and tell us about the experience of this union in promoting ethical sourcing of ingredients from biodiversity. She's the representative from Union for Ethical Biotrade is Maria Julia Oliva. She's the Deputy Director and Senior Coordinator for ABS and Policy. This may be a good opportunity to tell the audience that the conference Sourcing with Respect, which you guys organize every year, is taking place right now, I understand. And it's a useful series of dialogues for exchanging views on sourcing with respect, ABS in business, and so on. But I will leave you, Julia, to tell us, Maria Julia, to tell us more about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. And I go by Julia, and you made me sound very formal with representative of UEBT, but everybody can call me Julia. Thank you so much. Thank you to the UN Biodiversity Secretariat and also to the UNDP Global Project on ABS for the possibility to join this webinar series. It's always really important to celebrate birthdays, anniversaries, but it's also useful to take those opportunities to reflect a little bit on how things are going, what has been achieved and the work ahead. So let me try and do that very briefly today. So for the Union for Ethical Biotrade, where I work, UEBT, the work on ABS predates the Nagoya Protocol. You may know that UEBT is actually a spin-off from the Untitled Biotrade initiative, which was set up already in 1996 as a way to advance the 3 objectives of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And UEBT was launched in 2007 with a specific purpose of engaging directly with business and promoting and validating good practices, including on access and benefit sharing among companies working with ingredients from biodiversity. So what does that mean? What type of companies do we work with? Actually, you've already heard from several. You've heard from Natura, which is a cosmetics brand, of course, which is one of our founding members. You've just heard from Ricard at Provital, which is also a UEBT member, and they're, of course, a different type of company, as he explained. They specialize in inactive ingredients for cosmetics. We also work with companies in food, fragrance and flavors, herbs, spices, and natural pharmaceuticals. Everything from small companies, associations working at the local level to laboratories, processing companies, and brands. And what we do is really to set the good practices for how these companies work with biodiversity. So we're talking about sustainable use, we're talking about conservation, we're talking about also regeneration, all social issues, human rights, etc. So ABS is there, it's a key element, but it's really nestled in this broader approach to working with biodiversity. So over these years and with this approach, how have we seen ABS implementation? So I'm going to later put in the chat box actually a little video we prepared that summarizes the views of some of our members and partners of what 10 years of the Nagoya Protocol have meant. But let me highlight here 2 main points. First is, I think it's very important to note that the Nagoya Protocol doesn't exist in a vacuum. So ABS rules and principles embody really a much broader change in paradigm, the change in the way in which companies and other actors value and engage with biodiversity. And I think this is a little bit what Heather Ducharme from The Body Shop was saying when she said, you know, I think actually not only companies, but all of us are starting to look at biodiversity in a different way. And the need to engage and to respect biodiversity, I think, is increasing. At least we're also seeing this in the context of the annual survey that UEBT does, which is called the Biodiversity Barometer and has just come out. So I think it's very important to place ABS as a piece in a bigger puzzle of how we work together to recognize rights, promote partnerships, and seek to ensure that our work has a positive impact. It really needs to be in that broader context. The second point I wanted to make is that it is clear over the past 10 and even more years that the awareness of access and benefit sharing among companies is increasing. And this awareness has led to a restructuring of company policies, procedures, and practices. So UEBT works quite close together with its members and other partners, for instance, to set up due diligence systems on ABS, which allow companies to assess the applicability of ABS along their supply chains. So policies on the Nagoya Protocol, ABS procedures, ABS declarations, which nobody would have heard of a few years back, are now common tools in this sector. And I think this is also very important to highlight. So a lot has changed. We've achieved a lot. But as far as ABS implementation goes, we also have a lot of work still to do. And the challenge is that I think it's only when we manage to do this work is that we will have proof of concept, right? The proof is always in the pudding, in actually the results. Or other people might say, and I've seen some of the questions going around, the proof is in the actual benefits being shared. And I think that this is very important. We can only talk about ABS being successful when we're talking not about laws and not about policies, but actual practices, when we can assert that ABS is fit for its purpose. So what that means for me is that we cannot afford ABS systems that remain so fussy in their scope, that we never know what activities fall in or out, that have timelines and requirements that have no relation to what is actually being regulated, and to have systems that don't actually lead to more innovation, to local livelihoods being improved, to local biodiversity being regenerated. And I think this is in part a challenge for the regulators, because of course they're the ones having to develop these rules. But I think the challenge is also for business, and for those of us such as UEBT that work with business, which is that the challenge is to engage in a way that we can more actively build trust, share experiences and information, this communication that keeps coming up in the various panelists, and all of us contribute to generating ABS rules and actual practices that work and that are meaningful in the way that they contribute to more equity and more conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. So those are just my brief comments today, but I'm happy to answer questions and just further engage in discussions with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia, for those remarks, and please keep an eye on the question and answer section. There will surely be questions addressed to you. And thanks to all of you, particularly Jose Renato, who has been busy answering a series of questions addressed to him. Thanks to all of the speakers who have been also responding questions. We have now another representative from the from industry, in this case from the biotech sector. Marcus Weiss is the director of the Global Regulatory Affairs at DSM Nutritional Products. It's a company focusing on nutritional products. And he's also the chair of the ABS Task Force of the International Chamber of Commerce. I see that you have a little presentation. We share with you in advance some guiding questions that I would like to read out loud, so for participants to understand what they can expect from your little intervention. What is industry commitment to ABS and the Nagoya Protocol? And based on these commitments, what are the industry's policies and codes of conduct adopted to comply with ABS provisions? Also, what are the main challenges that the private sector is facing to complying with ABS legislation? And I may leave it at that and ask you the following questions later. Would you prefer, have you articulated your presentation around all the 5 questions, or do you want me to? Yeah, okay. So we are expecting that you will touch upon also about the characteristics, the different characteristics of the different biotech industries, type of industries within the biotech sector, and how they address ABS in different ways, and also about the future perspectives on ABS that are emerging from private industry. What are your views on this? Thank you.
Many thanks, Isabel, and also many thanks to Alejandro and all the organizers for this insightful series of webinars on the occasion of the 10-year anniversary of the Nagoya Protocol, and for giving us the opportunity to share some industry views. A lot of the discussion so far was centering on the cosmetics sector. I tried to be broader, covering industry in general, although I will rely on some specific examples from our own industry, DSM, or from our own company, DSM, in order to make things a little more tangible and a little bit more practical. DSM is a globally active business-to-business company with roughly 25,000 employees and a turnover of 10 billion euros. The markets we serve are animal nutrition, human nutrition, personal care, cosmetics. Also, we deliver into the pharmaceutical market, and we also produce high-performance plastics. We are well known for our micro-ingredients for nutrition, vitamins, nutritional lipids, colorants, carotenoids, and so on. And in terms of production methods, we may start with actually plants, extracting active ingredients from plants, but we may also use chemical synthesis or fermentation. The preference of production methods is driven on one hand by customer interests, customer preferences, but even more so about sustainability considerations. What is the most efficient methods to produce a given bioactive? DSM is very committed to sustainability as reflected in the participation in those global initiatives listed here. And among others, DSM is a partner of the UN World Food Programme and also a partner in the Africa Improved Foods Public-Private Partnership. And we feel that it is through those initiatives and those engagements that we can best use our values as a company, but also our skills to provide value to society without the need for access and benefit sharing agreements. Let us now turn to examples how industry is using biodiversity. In this example here, there is a one-to-one relationship between the provider country, Morocco, the genetic resource from which it is, the product is derived, the argan tree, and then the final product. So the case seems simple. There's one access and benefit sharing agreement needed to be concluded in order then to secure compliance of the final product with the expectations. This is the example that seems to dominate the international discussions, the international political discussions on access and benefit sharing. However, the reality for most of us, and that was alluded to already in the previous interventions, is very, very different. As shown here on the left, supply chains are often very complex with multiple consecutive companies in a chain where each intermediate produced by any given company may serve as an end product in its own right, but may again serve as an input for the next company to produce a next value added product. Obviously, the questions to be answered is where in the value chain to share benefits. And you may imagine that this would require a lot of communication forth and back on who is doing what and needing to do what in order to comply. The additional challenge we obviously observe is that many of our suppliers, they have not even heard about Nagoya even now in the year 2020. So they are heavily surprised if they suddenly need to fill in Nagoya compliance questionnaires. Secondly, most commercial products are not composed of a single component. Here you see a typical product in our portfolio where there's multiple biological materials. Again, each one of those individual ingredients may be derived from multiple genetic resources, eventually from multiple countries, provider countries. Does this mean that obligations, benefit sharing obligations, then are stacking, that you need to add 1% every time you have a different country or a different ingredient? Or how, again, is it practically possible to negotiate a fair share between the different provider countries? How to determine the relative value of each ingredient and what it means for benefit sharing? The next complexity also, again, less so for big companies, but definitely for small and medium-sized companies, how to keep abreast with the developments in up to 200 different countries, each having a different access and benefit sharing law. And what also was also already mentioned, the legal uncertainty. So, Isabel, you mentioned it. What does this mean then in terms of commitment from industry? And I've tried to separate it in two parts on this slide. On the left hand, clearly a commitment. Yes, industry is clearly committed to the topic per se. There are industry sector specific ABS agreements. You're well aware of probably the International Treaty for Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, and the Pandemic Influenza Preparedness Framework. Industry for many years is also engaged in international processes, with the International Chamber of Commerce playing a prominent role in the discussions around the CBD. In the EU, particularly, industry was actually the party, the stakeholder group contributing most in the drafting of the so-called sectorial guidance documents. And what was also already mentioned by some of the previous speakers, many of the companies have very thorough internal compliance systems in place in order to deal with the requirements and the expectations under the Nagoya Protocol. So the commitment clearly is there. What was said already on the previous slide also, overall, the way the system is set up creates also incentives actually not to access biodiversity because of all the complexities, because of all the legal uncertainty. And in terms of expectations, I think it's also fair to say that, that also the entire environment has changed. While previously many companies accessed biodiversity, did bioprospecting in order to get to new innovative solutions, there has been a shift to alternative platforms, combinatorial chemical libraries, for instance. And there has also been a realization that actually there is a high biological diversity just around the corner, that you do not need to go abroad in order to access a high biological diversity. You can also just access the soil biodiversity in your garden, for instance. So this is the two-sided picture. On one hand, the commitment is high, in my perception, but the system as such as it is built is creating incentives for compliance rather than access and benefit sharing. Well, we are at the 10-year anniversary. What does this mean for the future? The CBD and the Nagoya Protocol, they address an important aspect, an important issue of social justice. And this is something to be there. This is something important. So there is a future. Sustainability in all its dimensions is increasingly shaping industry priorities and also innovation. Doing business ethically and responsibly is also primarily a question of values, not of rules. And this is, in principle, my desire that there is a shift in thinking that the policies and legislative measures should focus on incentivizing a desired shift in values, rather than further bolstering a compliance culture through ever more encompassing and restricting legislation. And one of those issues where we eventually considered going even further is obviously the whole discussion on digital sequence information. So to finish off, I think I would like, similar to the dancing analogy that was used by Matthew in the beginning, where I still feel I'm stumbling despite a lot of experience in dancing. Also use an analogy from biology. The Nagoya Protocol has served its purpose of what was also said before, creating awareness, rising the importance, rising the urgency of the issue. However, we feel that the time is ripe, that in principle, the whole thing should undergo metamorphosis, going into reshaping, making the system fit for the next phase of the life. And my sincere hope is that in 10 years from now, we will see a wonderful butterfly, and with its aerial perspective, this butterfly can look back on 10 years of sustainable use, including benefit sharing. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Marcus, for your presentation, for sharing those reflections with us. Next panelist is Mr. Matthew Downham, who's the representative of the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations. He will be our final panelist today, and then we can, if people can stay for a little longer, we can dedicate some time sometimes for questions and discussions. Also, a series of questions were addressed to Matthew for him to take into consideration in his talk. Particularly, what is the commitment of the pharmaceutical sector to ABS, and how is the level of compliance within the pharmaceutical sector? What is the role that the private sector plays in the present pandemic, taking into consideration the principle of benefit sharing? Again, I'm going to ask you, like I did with Marcus, would you like to answer these questions one by one or in pairs, or would you like me?
So I'll certainly try and address it. I'll certainly try and address each of the questions that have been posed to me. So I'm happy to have a go at that, if that's okay.
Please.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks very much indeed. So firstly, Isabel, thank you very much indeed to you and all your colleagues for the opportunity to present today. It's quite unusual for industry to be able to have such a close engagement with the CBD in a CBD conference, but it's much appreciated. And echoing what some have said already, it's important to have this open dialogue and this open engagement. Certainly, if you look at the last 10 years, and it's, happy birthday as well to the Nagoya Protocol as well. But if you think about the next 10 years, when the Nagoya Protocol celebrates its 20th birthday, where do we hope to be, or where should we hope to be? Now, obviously, the ABS clearinghouse is a phenomenal resource. It provides key intelligence, key data, contact points, and it's a great achievement in the 10 years to date. And it's where industry goes to try and understand what ABS legislation exists in country and what we therefore have to follow and what we have to comply with. Because crucially, what we're trying to do is develop either vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics to sustain and improve public health. And certainly some of the preparedness and response that we require to do is kind of at odds a little bit with the varied and multilateral, bilateral, Nagoya systems that exist. So it's key that we have a kind of clarity moving forward over the next 10 years when Nagoya celebrates its 20th anniversary, to be able to understand more clearly what national systems require and what we have to do to comply with the C that Matthew shared a little earlier. And also, as Matthew shared a little earlier, I called that the ABS clearinghouse is going to have a feature, or has a feature, to guide through the various legislation, through the various rules and procedures. I would also support the call there for different countries to really populate that area of the ABS clearinghouse, because it will be a phenomenal assistance, because establishing things like bilateral systems with each and every individual country is very difficult. It takes time, And for an industry, a sector that is very time limited, time is crucially of the essence. So what industry particularly needs is rapid, unhindered, unrestricted access to pathogen genetic resources and or digital sequence information. As Marcus has just indicated there, digital sequence information is used arguably more than bioprospecting as was originally considered for I think the Nagoya Protocol. Any kind of delay that impacts or disrupts the development will ultimately potentially have impact to global public health. So for example, I could cite the current COVID-19 vaccine response. The genetic sequences of the early SARS-CoV-2 were uploaded to the GISAID website following sequencing and were accessed openly and freely, I don't mean financially, I mean openly in an open way. And from there, vaccines, diagnostics, therapeutics have been developed. Had we gone into some of what biopharma has begun to experience in the influenza sector that I work a lot in, has experienced things from 3 or 4 weeks delay to understand what we have to do to comply with ABS legislation, through to 3 or 4 months. Those kinds of timelines from a pharma development perspective, particularly when you're time critical, are not very helpful, as it were. So let's think if the COVID-19 sequences had to go through an iteration of bilateral picks and mats. The incredible news that Pfizer announced earlier this week that there is potential efficaciousness with their particular vaccine, we wouldn't be hearing that this week. We'd be hearing that in about January or February, once those legal iterations have been gone through. So that is where the complexity comes in, where industry particularly would like to see and would really appreciate an understanding on the rules and the procedures that require us to be compliant, because we do, of course, wish to be compliant. The alternative there is to urge countries with ABS legislation impacting pathogen sharing to consider a kind of special public health situation that pathogens have and address this accordingly. Or alternatively, for those countries that have not implemented ABS legislation, encourage them to consider special situations and not necessarily implement pathogens and digital sequence information into their legislation. So in terms of things like the commitment that the pharma sector has, we've been very involved as much as we can through the WHO, through the Nagoya Protocol. We've engaged on various activities. Amber Schultz, for example, spoke last week about the Wild SI project last week in the equivalent forum to this, where we've had an opportunity to contribute. We've contributed at various meetings. In fact, I've even got my water bottle here from the COP14 in Sharm el-Sheikh a couple of years ago. We were present and contributed to meetings in South Africa that Letitia was also present at last year regarding DSI negotiations. We collaborate with the PIP framework within Geneva with the WHO to engage with them regarding ABS activities. And we have largely kind of paused in some respects or reduced our natural research. We rely very much now on digital sequence information, but we also rely very much on the open dialogue that we have. And a nice example of that with a member state government, and I know a few of the folks are on the phone on the call today, here in the UK, through DEFRA, the UK government, there is an ABS task force that frequently has and holds open communication with the biopharma industry within the UK, not solely the biopharma industry, but the biopharma industry contribute there. That is an absolute key contact point to facilitate engagement with the Nagoya Protocol focal point and the organization, the government organization responsible for driving that forward in the UK. So better communication across government ministries, simplified ABS regimes, easy access to information, but also those pathogens and genetic sequences is what is key. And that is how biopharma is trying to engage to ensure sustainable use of these in future. I guess also there is a question regarding how compliant the biopharma sector is. As I indicated, we want to be compliant. We have to be compliant. There is legislation or regulatory rules that pharma industry has to comply with and follow and adhere to. And Nagoya is one of those. ABS legislation is one of those. So it's key to make sure that we can engage with government bodies, non-government organizations, academia, and at conferences such as this opportunity today, as I indicated, we're very grateful for, to be able to facilitate that discussion, that compliance, and that engagement moving forward. In terms of what role the private sector plays in the present pandemic, and I know this is a key question that obviously many people have been asking about. So the IFPMA, who I'm representing today, is one of the founding partners of the Access to COVID-19 Tools, the ACTA Accelerator, that has become key as we're moving closer to being able to distribute vaccine for fair and equitable sharing of the vaccines. And this is actively delivered through what's called the COVAX facility, formed by the WHO, Gavi, and CEPI. But as I indicated a few moments ago, had the bilateral engagement been required and driven through the ABS legislation to negotiate use of the early SARS-CoV-2 sequences that were uploaded to the GISAID database, if we had to negotiate those, we might not be in the fortunate position today of hearing the great news from Pfizer and BioNTech earlier this week that they are seeing efficacy or protection against their vaccine to get us out of this dreadful pandemic that has really gripped the global community. We touched on DSI, Marcus mentioned it, and it's one of the questions I've been asked to address, and I realize time's ticking on. But DSI, digital sequence information, particularly nucleic acid, genetic sequence information, is critically used by industry. It's relied on throughout the biopharma drug development process. It's used from the research and development, the manufacturing, developing quality control tests. It's used for ensuring standardization through the whole manufacturing process, the in-process testing, through to drug product release. One of the things that we are concerned about with DSI is the actual scale of digital sequence information. I mean, to give an indication of that, for the SARS-CoV-2, about 170,000 sequences have been uploaded to the GISAID database for that one pathogen alone. And arguably, or potentially, every single one of those sequences could be downloaded from GISAID, engineered, changed, mutated using genetic sequence methods, and then re-uploaded. You could double that 170 very easily simply by downloading the sequences, mutating them, and uploading them again. The scale of digital sequence information, the speed at which it can be shared, makes it incredibly difficult if indeed ABS legislation is going to go that direction. And that comes back to understanding the compliance that we touched on a little earlier and that Matthew has talked about as well. So the main challenges for the private sector is to understand this rather complex global landscape of ABS legislation that's not harmonized, and we have to engage in bilateral picks and mats negotiations to be able to potentially use pathogens all the time. The clock is ticking, and we need to get on with developing vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. So it's that divergence of ABS legislation, it's that misharmonization, it's the understanding and the need to comply that makes it very burdensome in some respects, certain industries, to be able to facilitate and have resource specifically designated to it. So this, as I indicate, is why ministries of health engagement with them is key to educate and help them understand the legislation that they've either implemented or the legislation they're about to implement, to try and mitigate or control that to support the fundamental kind of preamble that's in the Nagoya Protocol, referring to the importance of ensuring access to human pathogens for public health preparedness and response purposes. I would certainly concur with that importance and the fundamentality of the need to pursue that activity. There are a number of examples. I can see I'm getting close to time. There are a number of examples from the world of influenza. So I work for AstraZeneca in Liverpool in the UK, and we make a live attenuated influenza vaccine. And we constantly are watching the flu strains that are globally circulating and coming up against issues regarding ABS clarity and support where it's required to be able to use particular influenza strains to develop the next vaccine candidate for the following year, which we have a very tight time on. We have a 6-month window to do that in from WHO strain announcement. So any kind of delay, even if it's 3 weeks, a week, 9 months, 3 months, all of that delay will completely render that flu strain unable for use really within a season, within a particular season. And by the time the following season comes along, it might not be matching or representative of what's circulating globally. So the speed is of essence, the compliance is of essence, the understanding and the engagement is key. And I think with that point, I will wrap up there. I think I've kind of addressed the questions that I was asked to address, and I'm happy to address any more in the Q&A. And once again, happy birthday, and here's to the 20-year birthday party, where hopefully industry and the IFPMA can also contribute and be present. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Matthew, very much. And I have to apologize because I didn't mention when I introduced you that you are, in addition to the representative of the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, you are the Associate Director at AstraZeneca, dealing with scientific and technical affairs. So yeah, thanks for being with us today and for sharing those reflections, particularly the general discussion, your views on the general discussion around the DSI. I have a general question to all of you. All of you have talked about transparency and the need for transparency in the laws, in the regulations, in the procedures applied by national authorities, and the need for an easy access to information about the applicable national laws and regulations. I would like to turn that call for transparency to all of you and ask you what you're doing for improving transparency of your own procedures, the efforts you make to align your practices to the ABS philosophy, to make sure that you observe national legislation. After having a quick look at your websites, this type of information is not that easy to find. One cannot tell at a first sight what you're doing to meet the ABS, high ABS standards, the kinds of agreements you're entering, the practices that you are applying. So what are your intentions in terms of transparency, and what the achievements that you will like to get for increasing transparency within the private sector? And this is a question addressed to all of you. So I let you guys yes.
Well, I see the others are shy to answer, so I will start. From our point of view, we try to be transparent. Of course, we are not giving all the details on all the projects we are doing, because some of them are still private and confidential information. So we are not opening this to the public, to the general public, but we are transparent within our sector. So we are collaborating a lot in presentations from the sector, from the industries to spread the message of ABS. So we have been working with CBI. We have been working with different associations of cosmetic products in France, in Europe, in conferences based on ABS. And there we go there, we explain our experiences, and we try to help people explaining this and answering the doubts they may have. So this is what we are doing. And of course, directly with our customers, because we really believe that it is good for our marketing. So we use it, of course. Why not?
So maybe if I can share some transparency from the influenza world, as it were. We have close interaction with the WHO. We meet with them every 2 weeks through the year, and then twice per year for the annual strain selection meeting for the Northern and the Southern Hemisphere meetings, Northern and Southern Hemisphere strain selections. And throughout that, we are constantly engaging on what strains have got Nagoya compliance, Nagoya ABS legislation surrounding them. because that is something that not only industry, but the WHO collaborating centers are very mindful of, because it may impact their activities as well. They will have to have people designated to understanding the ABS legislation and ensuring that they are compliant with it in terms of their activities. There have been examples where some countries, WHO collaborating centers, national influenza centers in country, have been prevented from sharing their flu strains because the national member state legislation prevents them from doing so, despite the fact that there are terms of reference between the national influenza centers and the WHO to actively share those strains straight away. So we get understanding of that type of information, and it's important that we continue to be transparent as much as is feasibly possible to facilitate the key work that we're doing to share pathogens, to be able to develop vaccines throughout the world.
And if I might jump in. Sorry, Matthew, were you done?
No, I'm done.
No, just to jump in on this question. So the importance of transparency, no question. The lack of transparency, I'm not so sure actually, Isabel, because if you just look through, I mean, the example that Matthew has given, but Natura is reporting on its access to benefit sharing payments in its annual reports. The Body Shop has, published case studies on its own experiences. Provital has, issued press releases around its projects, and also has a very nice UNDP case study on this. So I think that companies that engage on these issues, actually, there's no problem with transparency. And I would even say, I think, in the experiences that I have with going through permitting processes, I think both regulators and companies are quite sophisticated in the way that they manage confidential information. So I've not seen this be a problem in negotiations. I think once partners sit around the table in a constructive manner, it's clear that information needs to be shared and needs to be done in a clear and in a way that can be followed up on. So I don't think that that's as big of a problem as for the companies that, at least, that are engaging. Whether it's possible to follow up on the ones that aren't engaging, that's a different question. But I think props should be given for the companies that are engaging and then the ones we've heard from today, because it's not necessarily easy, and they are absolutely doing it.
Thank you. Yeah. Please, I see you would like to speak. Please go ahead.
Okay, I can complement the answer, but Natura, for example, has a policy, a specific policy for sustainable use of biodiversity, and we train our teams to follow this policy. And all the information is shared through our annual report and through our communication channels. And now we are studying, we are in a study phase to understand the impacts and the opportunity to implement the Nagoya Protocol. I think that this is it. Thank you.
Thank you for those clarifications and that additional information about transparency. Particularly Marcus and Matthew, you have claimed, you have called for open access to DSI and pathogens. Matthew, you have referred in particular to influenza strains and the free exchange of influenza strains. What are you willing to give in exchange once those vaccines, once the products are developed? How could you consider some kind of open access to them?
This is Matthew speaking. So in terms of open access, we have our set market. AstraZeneca and other vaccine companies have their markets that they supply vaccine to. However, through the WHO, through working closely with the Global Influenza Group and the Pandemic Influenza Group, there's a whole load of non-monetary benefits in terms of intelligence, in terms of sharing of understanding and experience and values regarding the quantities of vaccines that we are able to produce, etc. So there is a lot of sharing of and access to understanding and intelligence. The vaccines industry also contributes to the pandemic influenza preparedness framework. There is an annual partnership contribution, and those funds are used to support the global influenza surveillance and response system and the national influenza centers worldwide, of which there is close to about 150, possibly more, in about 90 or so countries. So there is already an infrastructure around flu that supports the activities from as I said, the grassroots, the national influenza centers, right the way through to ultimately release of vaccine drug product. So there is quite a lot already going on, as well as all the collaboration, as well as all of the non-monetary activities that surround those as well. Over.
Yeah, if I may add, and I cannot start up my camera anymore. I was blocked there, just in case you want to see me. Well, it is a complex question that you ask, and I did not say there should be no benefit sharing. I just said we should not expand a very demanding regulatory system also to include digital sequence information. If you see it is already poorly working for genetic resources, or at least having significant challenges, increasing the level of complexity by trying to also cover digital sequence information would not be a good idea. Secondly, I think all those international sequence databases have been set up explicitly open access for a good reason, because it was felt this is providing the most value to society. So now imposing obviously restrictions to that access has also downsides, and these need to be taken clearly into account. And I think many discussions have happened over the last weeks, driven by Amber Schultz on that topic. So in the end, as said, it must be careful, it must be very considerate, and we should not try to solve something and risk something else that has already proven to provide quite a lot of value.
Thanks, Marcus and Matthew for those remarks. Yeah, I find it quite balanced, your interventions. I have selected a couple of comments / questions from the question and answer section, and I will open the floor to all of you guys to address the ones that you feel more comfortable addressing. One is about monitoring. It's about understanding the actual effects that ABS and the projects you are involved in are having on real people's lives. And what are your considerations in terms of indicators and monitoring mechanisms that can help us understand to what extent ABS is contributing to the other two objectives of the convention, conservation and sustainable use, and at the end of the day, to improving people's lives? That's my first question. My second question is in reaction to a long comment and a funny one, the question and answer section, which calls for a multilateral benefit sharing system, which will allow us to dance in a much funnier and nicer way and more in accordance with the current times. What are your views on the establishment of a multilateral benefit sharing system that will probably address some of the issues that we are dealing with right now, particularly in relation to DSI?
This is Matthew speaking. I'm happy to have a go at those two questions if you wish. I mean, certainly in terms of contribution to the access and benefit sharing process, you know, the pharmaceutical industry is quite concerned, as I indicated earlier, by the constraints that are levied through it in terms of time practice, in terms of pathogen access, etc., and understanding what we need to do. So the contribution is to try and help educate and drive forward change that facilitates open access and pathogen sharing. And some of that, I think, is leveraged into the non-monetary benefits that are facilitated. I think it's key to recognize as well, I guess one of the principles of the Nagoya Protocol is to safeguard biodiversity. pharmaceutical industry is trying to do the opposite. We don't want to preserve or make more diverse or longevitize COVID, smallpox, tuberculosis, cholera, etc. It's a very different concept, and so maybe the non-monetary benefits is something that would be of better focus, arguably, in terms of the contribution to the ABS principles. In terms of the multilateral benefit system, and I think, as I indicated, if you have to go into a negotiation with every country that you receive or about to get flu vaccine, flu strains from, you'd spend your life negotiating bilateral agreements. I mean, just in any one season, as part of the development process at AstraZeneca for flu vaccines, we might work with 30, 40, 50 different strains from literally all over the planet. We have to negotiate bilateral agreements with every single one of those countries, and thankfully we don't. But if we did, that would take forever. It would just be a ridiculous situation given the 6-month, 7-month window or timeline to be able to select the strain, put it into the vaccine, and distribute the vaccine in the millions of doses that we're asked to. So, you know, I saw the proposal in the Q&A as well, actually, the multilateral benefit. I can't remember who mentioned it, but I saw the proposal and thought, yeah, that would be one way at least of circumventing the issue of having bilateral agreement negotiation requirements. And I'd be keen to hear what others think as well. Over.
Maria Julia,
You know, I'm Argentinian. I'm very used to interrupting, and I know it's rude. Thank you. I think this is a very important question, but I'm very glad that Matthew got to it first. I think, you know, there are so many different situations and different types of activities that are regulated by the concept of access and benefit sharing. And you don't even have to go about what, you know, to what might be regulated, but currently is regulated. If we just compare the countries that have been online with us today, their scope of their laws is quite different. So I think what is important is to realize what it is that we want to regulate and what is the appropriate tool for that. So I think indeed the multilateral approach is one that probably makes a lot of sense for some of the activities and some of the uses of genetic resources that are covered by ABS. For others, not so much. So if we look at biotrade, for instance, which is covered by ABS rules in a country like South Africa, but where you're talking about really purchasing and processing a plant-based ingredient, then perhaps the multilateral system idea doesn't work. So I think it really depends. You'd have to not come up with one answer, but, you know, a myriad of answers to address all of these different situations. And I think another thing we have to be careful about is just creating legal certainty, right? So I think it's a little bit scary, I think, from the private sector perspective to always be dealing with an evolving system, right? So I think being able to have some clarity and predictability in the ABS system is also quite important to promote engagement. Thank you.
Well, if I may then still add, Marcus, I think talking to many people, if you ask them, quite some would say, well, if I could restart Nagoya, there should be a multilateral benefit sharing system. I think the ambition is to mainstream, and this means that things should be simple, should be easily understandable, easy to communicate. I think there's a lot about harmonization, which would simplify things. So there is a lot of benefit for a multilateral approach, but it should then not be a combination of parties bilateral and parties multilateral. Either it's an entire shift or then it would further add to complexity.
Thank you, Marcus, Matthew, Maria Julia. I would like now to turn to the national competent authorities, particularly Jose Renato and oh my Lord, well, yeah, Leticia. Well, for a moment, I found myself in the situation of having to say your surname again. So Leticia and Jose Renato, and also other possible national authorities who are following the webinar today. what are your reactions to what you have heard from private sector? Listening to their expectations, to their expectations, their preferences, their claims. How do you think national authorities should react? What will be a way to both facilitate and foster, and at the same time somehow force private industry to align, to observe ABS regulations? So the floor is yours, Jose, Renata, Leticia, and also other national authorities present in the webinar, please.
Thank you very much, Isabel. It's very much encouraging for me as a representative of the National Competent Authority in South Africa to hear the willingness and the commitment from the private sector side to adhere to the ABS principles. And that brings a challenge to us as the regulators, that how do we then make it user-friendly, I mean our regulatory system, and attractive to them. And I think one thing that South Africa has really worked hard on it was to make sure that we have our ABS regulatory requirements available in our national departmental website. And I think we are one of the leading contributors from the African region in terms of providing our information into the ABS clearinghouse, because we see it as a useful mechanism established under the Nagoya Protocol to send out the message about the regulatory requirements in South Africa. And I think another thing that we are seeing working even much better for us is also the support that we are receiving from the user countries' national focal points, through the implementation of the checkpoints and the checkpoint communique that we are receiving, in particular from the European Union. I think we've seen a lot of cooperation in terms of exchanging information on the utilization of the genetic resources from South Africa. And another thing that I think from the South African side, we have also moved on to a level where we also have what we call a National Bioprospecting Forum, which is a platform where we bring multi-stakeholders comprised of industries, communities, and all the relevant government departments, just to have a dialogue and exchange information on ABS-related matters, in even the challenges and possible solutions that could assist in unlocking some of the gaps and the challenges that are identified in the implementation. And for that reason, I think in my initial intervention, I did indicate that we are in a process of reviewing our legislation because of the dynamic environment, ABS environment. I know the Nagoya Protocol has introduced Article 8, which calls for emergency situation where you don't need to actually follow the rigorous permit application process, but call for parties to come up with some innovative way of ensuring speedily access to those genetic resources that are needed. So it's an element that we are working on in the review of our legislation. And the good thing about the approach that we have applied in the review is that we have actually established what we call a technical task team that is comprised of government, industries, and communities, so that we can brainstorm and discuss the issues based on our practical realities, and so that we can come up with an ABS framework that is attractive to the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Letizia, and also for for addressing the options under the possibilities under Article 8 of the Nagoya Protocol, the flexibilities allowed there. Jose Renato, I'm not sure if you're still online and if you would like to react.
Yes, yes, I'm here.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so as I mentioned, despite the 20 years of the Brazilian legislation on ABS, we are still taking the first steps in the implementation of the electronic system. And so we are working with the refinement of the operation system, the CISGEN. In these days, so we are improving the system in order to facilitate the access of the private sector. And then about the Nagoya Protocol, it was approved by the Brazilian Congress last August of this 2020, and now is with the Brazilian president to its signature. So Brazil is very close to ratify the Nagoya Protocol. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you. We are reaching the third hour of this session. Thanks to all the participants who have stayed, the loyal participants who have stayed with us until the end. A very big clap to all of you speakers, participants. It has been, at least for me, a super interesting session. And before we close, I would like to give the floor to Alejandro to say some closing words and also to tell us a bit about a proposal they are working with, which is very much related to this facilitating intentions that we have been talking about, using technologies for facilitating ABS. So Alejandro, the floor is yours, and I say bye-bye to everyone, and thanks for allowing me to be with you today.
Thank you, Isabel. And before closing, this connects actually with the last point made by Jose Renato, in the sense that referring to electronic system, and it's true, we have been talking about legislation and regulatory systems, but it seems that we are still far from using all the potential that technological tools could provide to ABS. No? In that sense, I take the opportunity of this meeting and that we have many representatives from the private sector to announce that the Global ABS Project has launched last week a call to receive proposals to test blockchain technology and smart contracts in the utilization of genetic resources to improve the traceability of the resources, but more importantly, to simplify ABS procedures and ensure benefit sharing. Please check our website or social media to find out the details of this call, where we are expecting proposals from consortia of academia and private sector. We know blockchain is not going to solve all the ABS problems, but we want to test if it can be used to substantially improve the present system at all levels, as we believe it can cover some of the problems raised by the participants, by the panelists, no? Of standardization, need to have a more simplified system, and so on and so forth. This is the end. Thank you, Isabel, for your great moderation of the session. Thank you to all the panelists it was a pleasure to have your participation. We have been honored and we have been very lucky to have you all today presenting your experiences from both sides and for initiating this important dialogue with private sector that we really hope that continues at national, regional, and international level. We would like to thank the interpreters, the team of the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the team of the UNDP-GEF Global ABS Project for the organization of the event. And we kindly invite you all to join us for the two incoming sessions, no? Both in English with Spanish and French interpretation. Next Wednesday, we will organize a dialogue between governments and indigenous peoples and local communities. And on Wednesday, 25th of November, we will have the final session to prepare for the post-2020 negotiations, gathering all the things, all the elements that have been discussed during this month, and hear from donors and international cooperation agencies on the future of ABS. That's all from our side today, and I hope that you can join us in the next two final sessions. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.